Most people don't fail because they lack talent. They fail because their inner world is chaotic, reactive, and hijacked by fear. You're chasing money, status, discipline, confidence, but the mind chasing those things is undisciplined, insecure, and noisy. That's like trying to build a skyscraper on sand. Until you control what you think, what you react to, and what you allow inside your head, every form of external success will collapse. This audiobook is not about dreaming bigger. It's about controlling yourself first, because the person who controls their inner world eventually controls outcomes. Chapter 1. Your inner world is running your life, whether you admit it or not. Let's start with something uncomfortable. Your life is not random. It is not unlucky. It is not confusing. It is predictable. Your habits, your income, your confidence, your relationships, none of these are accidents. They are outputs, and every output comes from a system. That system is your inner world. You wake up every day inside the same mind, the same emotional patterns, the same reactions, the same excuses dressed up as logic, and then you're surprised by the same results. That's the trap. Most people are obsessed with changing outcomes. More money, more discipline, more respect, more success. But they never question the mental environment producing their behavior. They want different results while running the same internal software. Same inputs, same outputs. You have a choice. You can keep fighting reality, or you can finally look at the source. Here's the truth most people avoid. Your inner world writes the script. Reality just reads it aloud. Look at your habits. Are they disciplined or impulsive? That didn't happen randomly. Look at your income. Is it growing or stuck? That didn't happen randomly. Look at your confidence. Is it calm or fragile? That didn't happen randomly. Every external pattern is an echo of an internal one. That's the key. Your life is not a mystery. It's a mirror. And mirrors don't lie, they just reflect. Most people don't want to hear this because it kills their favorite addiction: external blame. They blame the economy. They blame their past. They blame their parents. They blame timing, luck, or other people's advantages. But blame feels productive only because it protects the ego. Responsibility feels heavy because responsibility means you can't escape yourself. Here's what's really happening. Your inner world is full of untrained thoughts, unexamined beliefs, emotional reactions you never learned to control. So your behavior becomes inconsistent. Your focus collapses under pressure. Your discipline disappears when motivation fades. And then you call it burnout, or bad luck, or lack of opportunity. No, it's lack of inner command. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your internal control. That's not an insult. That's a diagnosis. And diagnoses are useful if you act on them. Let's get specific. Why do two people with the same skills get wildly different results? It's not intelligence. It's not talent. It's not even effort. It's internal stability. One person is calm under pressure. The other panics. One person delays gratification. The other seeks comfort. One person observes their thoughts. The other obeys them blindly. Same world, different inner worlds, different lives. You have a choice. You can continue letting your thoughts run on autopilot, or you can start treating your inner world like a system that needs structure. Because right now, most people's minds are chaos factories. They react before they think. They feel before they decide. They justify weakness instead of correcting it, and then they wonder why consistency feels impossible. Here's a hard rule. You cannot outperform your self-image for long. If internally you see yourself as reactive, undisciplined, or unsure, your actions will always drift back to that identity. That's the key. Change the inner world and behavior follows. Ignore it and you fight yourself forever. Most people try to fix their lives at the surface level. New routines, new planners, new goals, new motivational videos. But none of that works if the internal dialogue stays the same. If your inner voice is weak, doubtful, and emotional, no system will save you. Because the moment pressure hits, the mind takes over, and an undisciplined mind always chooses comfort over growth. That's not because you're lazy, it's because you're untrained. No one taught you how to manage thoughts, how to pause reactions, how to separate emotion from decision. So you live inside impulses and call it personality. That's dangerous, because impulses don't build futures, they destroy them. You don't need more motivation, you need more awareness. Awareness of what you think when no one is watching. Awareness of what you tell yourself when things get hard. Awareness of how fast your mood controls your actions. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, You have a responsibility. You have a choice. Here's a simple test. When something goes wrong, what happens inside you first? Do you get defensive? Do you get emotional? Do you start explaining instead of correcting? That internal reaction happens before any external action, and that reaction determines everything that follows. That's why two people can face the same setback and end up in opposite places. One reacts emotionally, one responds strategically, one blames, one adjusts, one spirals, one stabilizes. Same event, different inner worlds. Your inner world writes the script. Reality just reads it aloud. Say it again until it sinks in. If you want control over your life, you must first want control over yourself. That means slowing down reactions, questioning thoughts, interrupting emotional habits. It means realizing that not every thought deserves your attention. That's the key. Thoughts are suggestions, not commands. Feelings are signals, not orders. But most people treat both like laws, and laws shape behavior. From today, you stop asking, how do I change my life? You start asking, what mental pattern created this result? That question alone puts you ahead of 90% of people, because it moves you from victim to operator. You don't need permission to take control of your inner world. You don't need validation. You don't need approval. This is internal work, silent work, invisible work. And it's the foundation of everything that comes next. Here's your assignment before moving forward. Observe yourself, not judgment. Observation. Watch your thoughts when you're tired. Watch your reactions when you're challenged. Watch your excuses when discipline is required. Don't fix yet. Just notice. Because awareness is the first form of control. And without control, success is temporary. You can't build a powerful life on a chaotic inner world. You mastered the truth that your life is a mirror. Now it's time to learn how to stop reacting to it. You've seen the source. Now we address the damage. Chapter 2. Stop trying to win the world while losing control of your mind. Let's be blunt. If your mind is unstable, no amount of external success will save you. You can make money and still feel empty. You can gain status and still feel insecure. You can look disciplined and still be internally weak. Why? Because you're trying to win the world, while losing control of the one place that actually matters, your mind. That's the mistake. Most people think success fixes inner problems. They believe confidence comes after achievement. Peace comes after money. Control comes after recognition. Wrong order. That belief alone keeps people trapped for decades. You have a choice. You can keep chasing external wins, hoping one day they'll quiet the noise inside your head. Or you can do the uncomfortable work first. Mental control before material reward. That's the key. Here's the reality nobody wants to accept. If your mood changes based on people's opinions, outcomes you can't control, or short-term results, then you are not in control. You are being controlled by praise, by criticism, by wins and losses, by attention and neglect. That's not strength, that's dependency. And dependency makes you predictable. Predictable people are easy to manipulate, easy to distract, easy to defeat. You don't need their permission to be stable. You don't need validation to move forward. But if you haven't trained your mind, you'll keep outsourcing control without realizing it. Every time your motivation crashes because someone ignored you, every time your confidence drops because something didn't work, every time you hesitate because you're not feeling it, that's your inner world leaking into your actions, and it's costing you. Let's talk about ambition. Ambition without inner control is dangerous. It creates anxiety disguised as drive, burnout disguised as hustle, ego disguised as confidence. You start pushing harder externally while collapsing internally. That's why so many people look successful, but live exhausted, reactive, and emotionally fragile lives. They're winning on the scoreboard and losing inside the locker room. That's the key. If pressure breaks you, success will expose you, because success doesn't remove pressure. It multiplies it. More expectations, more eyes, more decisions, more risk. So if you can't manage your thoughts now, you won't magically manage them later. You're not ready yet. You're untrained, and training starts internally. Here's where most people get it wrong. They think controlling the mind means suppressing emotion, being cold, being robotic. No. Control means choice. Choice over reaction. Choice over impulse. Choice over attention. You feel anger, but you don't obey it. You feel fear, but you don't retreat. You feel doubt, but you don't stop. You acknowledge the emotion without letting it drive the car. That's mental authority. And without authority, ambition becomes self-sabotage. You have a choice. Let's get practical. Right now, your mind is trained to react first and explain later. Something happens. Emotion spikes. You act. Then you justify. That pattern ruins momentum. High-level performers flip the sequence. Something happens. They pause. They assess. They act intentionally. That pause is everything. That pause is where control lives. But most people never practice it. They let their inner state dictate their outer actions. Tired? Skip discipline? Frustrated? Say something stupid. Uncertain? Delay action. That's not honesty. That's lack of training. It's not about how you feel. It's about what you do despite how you feel. Say it again. It's not about emotion. It's about command. That's the key. Here's a hard truth. If you can't sit alone with your thoughts without distraction, you're not ready for success. Because success amplifies whatever is already inside you. If you're insecure now, you'll be paranoid later. If you're reactive now, you'll be volatile later. If you're unfocused now, you'll be overwhelmed later. So stop asking, how do I get more? Start asking, how do I stabilize? Stability beats intensity. Consistency beats motivation. Control beats talent. Every time. You don't need their permission to slow down and train your mind. You don't need approval to detach from noise. You don't need applause to do internal work. Most of this work is invisible, and that's why most people avoid it. Here's an instruction. For the next week, don't try to improve anything externally. No new goals, no new plans, no new pressure. Just do this. When you feel an impulse, pause. When you feel emotional, pause. When you want to react, pause. Ask one question. Is this reaction helping me win long term? That question alone will expose how often your mind works against you. Awareness creates distance. Distance creates choice. Choice creates control. That's the chain. Break the chain at awareness, and nothing changes. Most people are addicted to urgency. They confuse speed with progress, noise with movement, stress with importance. But urgency without control creates sloppy decisions. And sloppy decisions compound into regret. Calm people think clearer. Clear thinkers act better. Better actions create better outcomes. Simple, not easy. That's why this chapter matters. You don't conquer the world by force. You do it by mastery. Mastery of attention. Mastery of emotion. Mastery of response. Until you have that, every win is unstable. Your inner world writes the script. Reality just reads it aloud. Never forget that. You've now seen the danger of chasing external success with an uncontrolled mind. Next, we go deeper. Because even when people try to improve, one thing keeps destroying their progress silently. They react. They explode. They spiral. They sabotage. You've stopped chasing blindly. Now it's time to kill the reflex. Chapter 3. Emotional reactivity is the silent killer of potential. Let's get something straight. Most people are not failing because they are incapable. They are failing because they are reactive. They react emotionally. They react instantly. They react without thinking. And every reaction costs them something. Energy, focus, reputation, momentum. You don't see it immediately. That's why it's dangerous. Emotional reactivity doesn't destroy your life in one moment. It erodes it quietly, decision by decision. That's the key. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If something small can hijack your mood, something big will eventually hijack your future. A comment ruins your day. A delay kills your motivation. A minor setback makes you question everything. That's not sensitivity. That's lack of control. You have a choice. You can keep defending your reactions by calling them natural. Or you can accept that every uncontrolled reaction is a weakness someone or something can exploit. Because the world doesn't reward emotional honesty. It rewards emotional discipline. Let's define the problem clearly. Emotional reactivity is when you feel first and think later. You speak before you process. You act to release emotion, not to achieve outcomes. Anger feels powerful, but it's sloppy. Anxiety feels urgent, but it's useless. Ego feels protective, but it's fragile. Most people are ruled by these states all day long and call it being real. No, it's being untrained. That's the key. Think about this. How many opportunities did you damage because you replied too fast, quit too early, or acted while emotional? You didn't mean to sabotage yourself. You just didn't pause. Reactivity removes the pause. And without the pause, there is no choice. You're not deciding. You're discharging emotion. That's why reactive people repeat the same mistakes with different faces. Different jobs, different relationships, different goals. Same patterns, same outcomes. Your inner world writes the script. Reality just reads it aloud. Here's something most people don't understand. Powerful people feel emotion just as deeply as anyone else. The difference? They don't leak it into their behavior. They experience anger internally. They process fear privately. They delay expression until clarity returns. That delay is everything. That delay is discipline. It's not about being calm all the time. It's about being contained. Contained emotion doesn't weaken you. Uncontrolled emotion does. That's the key. Let's break a myth. People think emotional control makes you less human. Wrong. It makes you effective. If every emotion dictated action, you'd never stay consistent. You'd never build trust. You'd never finish anything meaningful. Discipline is choosing the long-term outcome over short-term emotional relief. That's it. And most people never practice that choice. They vent instead of thinking. They explode instead of adjusting. They escape instead of confronting. Then they wonder why growth feels impossible. You have a choice. Here's a hard rule you need to remember. Emotion is information, not instruction. Anger tells you something is off. Fear tells you something matters. Doubt tells you there's uncertainty. But none of them tell you what to do. You decide what to do, or at least you should. Reactive people confuse signal with command. They feel anger and act angry. They feel fear and retreat. They feel insecurity and seek validation. That's not awareness. That's obedience. And obedience to emotion is weakness. That's the key. Let's get practical. Right now, your emotional reactions are habits. They fire automatically because you've repeated them thousands of times. Good news? Habits can be interrupted, but only if you slow down the moment. So here's the rule you start applying immediately. Delay all emotional action, not suppression. Delay. When angry, wait. When excited, wait. When offended, wait. Even 10 seconds is enough to break the pattern. That pause gives logic time to enter the room. And logic changes outcomes. Say it again. Pause creates choice. Choice creates control. Most people avoid the pause because it feels uncomfortable. Silence feels weak to them. Stillness feels passive. But silence is dominance. Stillness is authority. The person who reacts last controls the frame. Reactive people reveal their triggers instantly. Controlled people reveal nothing. You don't need to announce how you feel. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to win every moment. You need to win the trajectory. That's the key. Let's talk about pressure. Pressure doesn't change people. It reveals them. Under pressure, reactive minds collapse. Disciplined minds sharpen. That's why this chapter matters. If pressure exposes your emotional volatility, your ceiling will always stay low, because higher levels demand emotional neutrality, strategic response, and delayed gratification. Not intensity, not passion, not raw emotion. Control. Here's another uncomfortable truth. People who speak their mind impulsively usually lack a mind worth speaking from, because a trained mind filters first. It asks, is this necessary? Is this useful? Is this aligned with my long-term position? Reactive people never ask those questions. They just react and feel justified. Justification is the enemy of growth. That's the key. So what do you do starting today? You stop trusting your first reaction. Not forever. Just long enough to evaluate it. You don't need to kill emotion. You need to outgrow it. You do that by observing instead of reacting, pausing instead of exploding, responding instead of venting. This is not about being nice. It's about being effective. Effectiveness compounds. Emotion doesn't. Here's your assignment. For the next 7 days, notice what triggers you. Notice how fast you react. Notice what you say immediately after emotion hits. Don't change it yet. Just see it. Because once you see your emotional patterns clearly, you'll realize something dangerous. Most of your problems weren't caused by other people. They were caused by uncontrolled reactions. That realization hurts, but it also frees you. Because what you control, you can change. You've now identified the silent killer, emotional reactivity. In the next chapter, we go even deeper. Because even when people slow down reactions, they still lose control somewhere else, inside their own head. Thoughts, assumptions, mental noise. You've learned to pause your emotions. Now it's time to question your thoughts. Chapter 4. Your thoughts are not truth, they are suggestions. Here's a fact that will either free you or make you uncomfortable. Most of what you think is not reality. It's interpretation. It's habit. It's conditioning. And if you don't learn to separate thought from truth, Your mind will quietly sabotage everything you try to build. That's the key. Let's start with something simple. A thought appears automatically, uninvited. I'm not ready. This won't work. They're better than me. What if I fail? You didn't choose that thought. It just showed up. But here's where most people lose control. They believe it. They treat every thought like a command from reality itself. That's the mistake. You have a choice. You can obey every thought that crosses your mind, or you can start treating thoughts like what they actually are. Suggestions, not orders, not facts, not destiny. Suggestions, that's the key. Most people have never questioned their thinking. They assume, if I think it, it must be true. That assumption alone ruins lives, because the mind is not designed to tell the truth. It's designed to keep you safe, comfortable, and familiar. And safety hates growth. Your mind exaggerates risk. It highlights past failures. It replays embarrassment. It predicts worst-case scenarios. Not because you're weak, but because your brain evolved to avoid danger, not build greatness. So if you blindly trust your thoughts, you will always choose the familiar over the necessary, comfort over progress, certainty over opportunity. That's why awareness matters. Let's be clear. Not every thought deserves your attention. Not every doubt deserves debate. Not every fear deserves action. But most people give all three equal authority. They think something once and let it shape their entire behavior. That's insanity. You wouldn't take advice from a stranger on the street. So why do you take advice from every random thought in your head? That's the key. Here's how this plays out in real life. You sit down to work. A thought appears. I don't feel focused today. Most people stop there. They obey the thought. They delay. They scroll. They wait for motivation. But that thought was just noise. A trained mind responds differently. It says, noted, now act anyway. Thought acknowledged. Authority denied. That's control. Control is not silence in the mind. Control is non-obedience. Let's talk about overthinking. Overthinking is not intelligence. It's fear pretending to be analysis. People who overthink believe they're being careful. In reality, they're avoiding action. They run simulations instead of experiments. They imagine outcomes instead of testing reality. Why? Because thoughts feel safe. Action feels risky. So the mind creates stories to justify inaction. And people fall for it every time. That's the key. Here's a hard truth. If you wait for your thoughts to align before you act, you'll wait forever. Because clarity follows action, not the other way around. Your thoughts will never feel ready. They will never feel certain. They will never feel perfect. That's not their job. Your job is to act with discipline, despite mental noise. Say it again. It's not about clarity. It's about command. Let's break another illusion. People think confident individuals have better thoughts. Wrong. They have less belief in their thoughts. They don't argue with doubt. They don't wrestle fear. They don't need to silence the mind. They simply don't obey it. That's the difference. Insecure people debate every thought. Strong people decide without permission. You don't need their permission. You don't need your thoughts' permission either. That's the key. Now let's get practical. From today, you introduce a rule. No thought gets authority without evidence. If your mind says, you're bad at this, you ask, based on what? If your mind says, this will fail, you ask, according to which data? If your mind says, they'll judge you, you ask, so what? Most thoughts collapse under questioning. They survive only because they're never challenged. Awareness kills illusions. Another important distinction. There is a difference between useful thinking and habitual thinking. Useful thinking helps you solve problems. Habitual thinking repeats the past. Most people confuse repetition with truth. They think something so often that it starts to feel real. But familiarity is not accuracy. Your mind is a replay machine. If you don't intervene, it will loop old stories forever. Same doubts, same fears, same excuses, same outputs. Your inner world writes the script. Reality just reads it aloud. Never forget that. Let's talk about identity-based thoughts. These are the most dangerous. I'm not disciplined. I'm not confident. I'm just not that kind of person. Those thoughts feel permanent. They feel factual. They're lies. They are labels, not truths. Labels freeze behavior. They lock you into patterns. And once you accept a label, your mind will work overtime to prove it right. That's confirmation bias. You miss opportunities. You avoid discomfort. You sabotage progress, all to stay consistent with a false identity. That's the key. So what do you do instead? You act against the thought, not aggressively, not emotionally. Calmly. Thought, I don't feel like it. Action, do it anyway. Thought, I'm not ready. Action, start imperfectly. Thought, this might fail. Action, test it. Action rewires belief, not thinking. Thinking follows behavior, always. Here's your mental upgrade. You stop asking, what do I feel like doing? You start asking, what does the system require? Systems don't care about mood. Systems don't negotiate. They execute. And execution creates evidence. Evidence builds confidence, not affirmations, not visualization, action. That's the key. You'll notice something interesting when you stop obeying thoughts. They lose power. They still appear, but they don't dominate. The mind learns a new rule. Thoughts don't decide here. You do. That's real authority. Here's your assignment. For the next 7 days, do this. Every time a limiting thought appears, say internally, suggestion noted. Then proceed with the action you already decided on. No debate, no justification. This is not about positivity, it's about leadership. And leadership always starts internally. You've now learned something critical. Your thoughts are not enemies, but they are not leaders either. They are tools, and tools don't get control. You do. You've learned to pause emotion. You've learned to question thoughts. Now comes the real test. Because knowing isn't enough. Execution requires something deeper, consistency. And consistency comes from discipline. Chapter 5. Discipline starts internally, not in your schedule. Most people misunderstand discipline. They think it's about planners, calendars, morning routines, productivity apps. That's surface-level thinking. If discipline came from schedules, everyone with a to-do list would be unstoppable. But they're not. Because discipline does not start with time. It starts with command. That's the key. Here's the real problem. Most people only act when they feel like it. They confuse motivation with discipline. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is structural. Motivation shows up randomly. Discipline shows up on command. And if your system depends on motivation, your results will always be inconsistent. You have a choice. You can wait until you feel ready, or you can decide that feelings don't get a vote. That's the difference between amateurs and operators. Let's be honest. You already know what to do. You know when to wake up. You know what work matters. You know what habits are holding you back. Lack of information is not the issue. Lack of internal enforcement is. You negotiate with yourself too much. I'll do it later. I'll start tomorrow. I'll go hard next week. That negotiation is weakness disguised as planning. Disciplined people don't negotiate with resistance. They override it. That's the key. Here's a hard truth. Every time you break a promise to yourself, your self-trust erodes. And without self-trust, discipline collapses. You stop believing yourself. You stop taking your own commitments seriously. You start relying on external pressure. Deadlines, fear, last-minute panic. That's not discipline. That's chaos management. Real discipline is quiet, boring, predictable. And that's why most people avoid it. Let's reframe discipline correctly. Discipline is not forcing yourself to do hard things. Discipline is deciding once and refusing to reopen the decision emotionally. That's it. Decision fatigue kills discipline. So disciplined people remove decisions. They don't ask, should I work today? They already decided. They don't ask, do I feel like training? They already decided. You don't need more willpower. You need fewer negotiations. That's the key. Most people think discipline is about intensity, going all in, grinding non-stop, pushing to the edge. That's not discipline. That's adrenaline. Adrenaline burns out. Discipline is consistency under boredom, doing the work when no one is watching, nothing feels urgent, and the results are far away. That's where discipline is built, and boredom is where most people quit, because boredom exposes the lack of internal structure. Let's talk about resistance. Resistance is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that something matters. Your mind resists effort because effort threatens comfort. That's normal. What's not normal is letting resistance decide. You don't argue with resistance. You don't analyze it. You don't wait for it to leave. You move through it. Say it clearly. Resistance is expected. Obedience to resistance is optional. You have a choice. Here's where people get stuck. They try to overhaul their entire life at once. New routine, new diet, new goals, new identity overnight. That's emotional ambition. Discipline works differently. Discipline compounds through small, enforced actions. Not dramatic change. Reliable change. One promise kept daily. Beats 10 promises broken weekly. That's the key. Let's get practical. From today, discipline becomes internal. That means one rule. You act based on decision, not mood. Mood is weather. Decision is law. You don't cancel discipline because you're tired. You adjust intensity, not commitment. You don't quit because it's hard. You simplify, not escape. Discipline is flexible in method, but rigid in execution. That distinction matters. Here's another trap. People confuse being busy with being disciplined. They fill their day with movement to avoid the discomfort of focus. Discipline is not doing more. It's doing what matters repeatedly. If your schedule is full, but your priorities are empty, you're not disciplined, you're distracted. That's the key. Let's talk about identity again. Undisciplined people say, "I'm trying to be disciplined." Disciplined people say nothing. They execute. Identity follows behavior, not intention. You don't become disciplined by declaring it. You become disciplined by acting like someone who doesn't negotiate with weakness. Every completed action reinforces identity. I'm someone who follows through. That belief compounds fast, but it only forms through action. Here's a reality check. If you only work hard when inspired, you're not disciplined. If you only show up when confident, you're not disciplined. If you need perfect conditions, you're not disciplined. Discipline means you show up anyway, calmly, without drama, without needing to feel powerful. That's real strength. Now let's destroy a common excuse. I'm just not disciplined by nature. That's a lie. Discipline is not personality-based. It's rule-based. People who seem disciplined simply operate under non-negotiable rules. Rules remove emotion. Emotion destroys discipline. So you stop relying on personality and start relying on structure. That's the key. Here's your internal rule set. You decide when you start, what you do, and when you stop. Then you execute without commentary. No internal speeches, no emotional analysis, no bargaining. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to feel confident. You don't need permission. You just need to act. Let's address failure. You will miss days. You will slip. That's not failure. Failure is quitting mentally. Disciplined people recover fast. They don't spiral. They don't self-attack. They reset and continue. Emotionless correction. That's the key. Here's your assignment. Pick one non-negotiable daily action. Something small, something boring, something useful. Decide the time. Decide the minimum effort. Then execute it daily for 30 days, no matter how you feel. That single action will do more for your discipline than any motivation ever will. You now understand something critical. Discipline is not external pressure. It's internal authority. It's not about pushing harder. It's about removing negotiation. You've learned to control reactions. You've learned to question thoughts. You've learned to act without mood. Now we move to the next level. Because even disciplined people lose power when they become obsessed with outcomes. You've built internal order. Now you must remove attachment. Chapter 6. Detach from outcomes or stay a slave to them. Most people don't realize this, but obsession with outcomes is one of the fastest ways to lose control. They say they want success, but what they really want is certainty. Certainty that effort will pay off. Certainty that results will come fast. Certainty that they won't look stupid, fail publicly, or waste time. That need for certainty turns into attachment, and attachment quietly destroys performance. That's the key. Let's be clear. Wanting results is normal. Needing results is dangerous. The moment you need an outcome, your behavior changes. You rush. You force. You overthink. You hesitate. Your decision-making becomes emotional instead of strategic, and emotional decisions are expensive. You have a choice. You can do the work and release the outcome, or you can cling to the result and sabotage the process. There is no middle ground. Here's how outcome attachment shows up. You check progress too often. You panic when results are slow. You change strategies prematurely. You lose discipline the moment things don't go your way. Why? Because your identity gets tied to the result. If it works, you feel worthy. If it doesn't, you feel exposed. That's not ambition. That's insecurity disguised as drive. And insecurity makes you fragile. That's the key. Let's say this clearly. The goal is not what gives you power. The process does. Goals are targets. Processes are weapons. People obsessed with goals quit when motivation drops. People committed to process keep moving regardless of mood. That's why professionals outperform dreamers. Professionals measure effort. Amateurs measure emotion. You don't control outcomes. You control inputs. And inputs compound. Most people reverse the equation. They want certainty before commitment. I'll work hard once I see results. I'll stay consistent once it pays off. I'll believe in myself once it works. That's backwards. Results follow discipline, not belief. Waiting for proof before effort is how average stays average. That's the key. Here's something uncomfortable. Attachment makes you impatient. Impatience makes you sloppy. You cut corners. You force timing. You abandon strategies too early. Not because they didn't work, but because they didn't work fast enough. Speed addiction kills long-term wins. Detached people play long games. Attached people chase quick relief. And quick relief always costs more later. Let's talk about pressure again. When you're attached to outcomes, pressure feels personal. Every setback feels like judgment. Every delay feels like failure. So you tighten up. Your thinking narrows. Your creativity drops. Your risk tolerance disappears. That's why athletes choke. That's why entrepreneurs panic. That's why creators burn out. They're not weak. They're attached. That's the key. Detachment does not mean apathy. This is where people misunderstand. Detachment means full effort, zero emotional dependency. You show up, you execute, you adjust. But you don't beg reality for validation. You don't let results decide your mood. You do the work because it's required, not because it guarantees comfort. That's strength. Here's a hard truth. The more desperate you are for a result, the worse your decisions become. Desperation narrows time horizon. It prioritizes short-term relief over long-term position. Detached people think clearly. Clear thinkers make better moves. That advantage compounds. Let's bring this back to control. Outcome attachment is just another form of external control. Your emotions rise and fall based on things you don't fully control. That means you're still reactive, just in a more socially acceptable way. You haven't mastered yourself yet. If outcomes dictate your inner state, that's the key. Here's the reframe you need. Your job is not to win today. Your job is to position yourself to win eventually. Positioning requires patience. Patience requires detachment. Every action you take is a vote. For the type of person you're becoming, you don't need the vote count immediately. You need consistency. Let's get practical. From today, you stop measuring success emotionally. No more. I feel like I'm failing. I feel behind. I feel like this isn't working. Feelings are unreliable metrics. You replace them with objective ones. Did I execute today? Did I follow the system? Did I improve slightly? If yes, day successful. That's it. Outcome delayed does not mean effort wasted. Say it again. Delayed results are not failure. Inconsistent effort is. Here's another trap. People use outcomes as motivation. When results show up, they work harder. When results slow down, they disappear. That's not discipline. That's reward dependence. You don't train a mind to work only when rewarded. You train it to work because it's the standard. That's the key. Detachment also protects your identity. If your self-worth is tied to outcomes, every loss feels like a personal verdict. But when identity is tied to behavior, losses become data, not drama, not trauma. Data. Data helps you adjust. Drama keeps you stuck. Choose wisely. You have a choice. Let's talk about comparison. Outcome attachment fuels comparison. You look at others' results and question your pace. That comparison creates urgency. Urgency creates errors. Everyone's timeline is different. Everyone's inputs are different. Detached people focus inward. Attached people scan outward. Guess who stays consistent? Here's a simple rule. Fall in love with execution. Detach from applause. Applause is noise. Execution is leverage. Most people chase recognition. Few people chase mastery. Mastery wins eventually, every time. Here's your assignment. For the next 30 days, do not track results daily. Track execution only. At the end of each day, ask, did I follow the system today? That's it. If the answer is yes, you win the day, regardless of outcome. This retrains your nervous system. It teaches your mind. That effort does not require immediate reward. That's power. One last truth. Outcome obsession creates fear. Fear creates hesitation. Hesitation kills momentum. Detachment creates calm. Calm creates clarity. Clarity creates precision. Precision wins. You've now removed another form of control from your life. You no longer react emotionally. You no longer obey thoughts blindly. You no longer depend on outcomes for stability. That puts you ahead of most people already. But there's one addiction left. one that silently pulls people back into weakness. The need to be seen, the need to be approved, the need to be validated. You've detached from outcomes. Now you must detach from applause. Chapter 7. Silence the need for validation before it ruins you. Let's say the quiet part out loud. The need for validation is one of the most socially accepted forms of weakness. It hides behind confidence. It hides behind ambition. It even hides behind humility. But make no mistake, if you need approval to move, you are not free. That's the key. Most people don't want success. They want recognition. They don't want mastery. They want applause. And that desire quietly controls their behavior. They speak to be liked. They act to be seen. They decide based on how it will look, not whether it's correct. That's not leadership. That's dependency. You have a choice. You can build your life based on internal standards, or you can let the crowd write your rules. One leads to authority. The other leads to exhaustion. Let's be honest. Validation feels good. Praise, likes, attention, agreement. The brain releases dopamine. You feel important. You feel safe. But here's the danger. The more you rely on validation, the less you trust yourself. You start outsourcing judgment. Is this okay? Do you think this will work? Does this make sense? Soon you can't move without someone else's approval. That's how people lose their edge. That's the key. Validation trains your mind to perform, not think. You stop asking, is this true? You start asking, will this be accepted? That shift changes everything. You avoid unpopular truths. You dilute strong positions. You soften decisions, not because they're wrong, but because they might offend. And the moment you prioritize comfort over correctness, your authority disappears. Here's the hard truth. People who need approval are easy to manipulate. Offer praise, they comply. Withdraw attention, they panic. That's why validation is a control mechanism. Social approval has replaced physical chains, and most people don't even realize they're trapped. You don't need their permission. That's the key. Let's talk about confidence. True confidence is silent. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek reassurance. It doesn't explain every decision. It moves. People who constantly explain themselves are not being clear. They're being insecure. Explanation is often a plea for agreement. Strong people decide, act, and let results speak. Here's where validation ruins progress. You delay action because you're not sure how it will be received. You quit early because no one noticed. You change direction because feedback was mixed. Your internal compass gets overridden by external noise. That noise is endless. If you let it decide, you'll never stabilize. That's the key. Let's be very clear. Feedback is useful. Validation is poison. Feedback helps you adjust execution. Validation controls your identity. Learn the difference. Feedback asks, how can this improve? Validation asks, am I good enough? One builds skill. The other builds dependency. Most people don't realize this. The desire for validation is just fear of standing alone, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being judged, fear of being wrong in public. But growth requires friction. Every meaningful move will offend someone. Every strong position will attract resistance. If you can't tolerate disapproval, you can't build anything real. That's the key. Let's talk about silence. Silence is uncomfortable. For people addicted to validation, they need reaction. They need acknowledgement. They need reassurance. But silence is power. When you don't explain, you force others to interpret. When you don't seek approval, you project certainty. Certainty attracts respect, not noise. Here's a dangerous habit. People announce plans instead of executing them. Why? Because announcement gives instant validation, likes, encouragement, attention. Execution gives none at first. So people trade future results for immediate approval. That trade is always a loss. That's the key. Let's ground this. If you stop seeking validation, 3 things will happen. First, people will be confused. They're used to you explaining, asking, adjusting. Second, some people will resist. Your independence threatens their influence. Third, your focus will sharpen, because energy once spent managing perception returns to execution. That's when progress accelerates. Here's your internal rule. No decision requires public approval. You can seek feedback privately. You can evaluate results objectively, but you do not crowdsource your spine. You don't need consensus. To move forward, you need clarity. Let's address ego. People think validation seeking is humility. It's not. It's fear wearing politeness. Real humility is acting without applause and adjusting without defensiveness. It doesn't beg for recognition. It just works. Here's your assignment. For the next 2 weeks, stop announcing plans. Stop explaining decisions. Stop fishing for reassurance. Execute quietly. Let silence do the work. Notice how uncomfortable it feels. That discomfort is withdrawal. You're breaking an addiction. One more truth. When you remove validation, you regain self-trust. You start listening inward. You stop reacting outward. That shift is massive because the person who trusts themselves doesn't need permission. They move. You've now removed another leash. No more emotional reactivity. No more blind obedience to thoughts. No more dependence on outcomes. No more addiction to validation. Now we go deeper. Because control is not just mental. It's environmental. What you allow around you shapes what you become. You've silenced the crowd. Now you must control the inputs. Chapter 8. Build an inner environment that supports power. Here's a truth most people underestimate. You are not just shaped by your decisions. You are shaped by what you consume. Your thoughts, your standards, your emotional baseline. All of it is influenced daily by your environment. And if you don't design that environment deliberately, it will design you by default. That's the key. Most people think environment is external. Location, people, circumstances. That's only half the story. Your inner environment is just as powerful. What you watch, what you listen to, what you read, what you replay mentally, those inputs create your internal climate. And climates determine what can grow. You have a choice. You can let random inputs shape you, or you can protect your mind like an asset. Let's get honest. Most minds are polluted. Too much noise. Too many opinions. Too much information with no filter. People scroll for hours and wonder why they can't focus. They consume chaos and expect clarity. That doesn't work. Clarity is not something you find. It's something you defend. That's the key. Every input leaves a residue. News creates anxiety. Social media creates comparison. Entertainment creates distraction. None of these are neutral. They all influence what you think about, how you feel, what you believe is possible. If you feed your mind low-quality inputs, you'll produce low-quality decisions. It's not about intelligence. It's about exposure. Here's where people get defensive. They say, I can handle it. It doesn't affect me. I'm just relaxing. No. Your mind absorbs patterns, whether you notice or not. Repetition programs identity. That's why environment matters more than motivation. Motivation fades. Environment stays. That's the key. Let's talk about people. Your inner environment is heavily influenced by who you allow consistent access to you. Complaining people create mental drag. Undisciplined people normalize weakness. Cynical people poison ambition. You don't need to cut everyone off, but you do need boundaries. Not everyone deserves proximity to your attention. Attention is expensive. Spend it wisely. Here's a rule you need to adopt. Anything that weakens your focus weakens your power. That includes constant notifications, meaningless debates, emotionally charged content, endless consumption with no creation. Power requires depth. Depth requires silence. Silence requires intention. That's the chain. Let's talk about self-talk. Your internal dialogue is part of your environment. If you constantly criticize yourself, you create internal hostility. If you constantly doubt yourself, you create internal friction. That friction drains energy. Strong people don't motivate themselves. They instruct themselves. Clear, calm, non-emotional. Do the work. Stay focused. Handle it. No drama. That's the key. Most people surround themselves with stimulation, music, podcasts, videos, constant input, because silence feels uncomfortable. Silence exposes thought. Thought exposes fear, so people avoid it. But silence is where control is built. If you can't sit in silence, your mind controls you. That's not a metaphor. It's a fact. Let's make this practical. From today, you audit your inner environment. Ask, what do I consume daily? What emotions does it create? Does it sharpen or scatter my focus? Be ruthless. You don't need to consume less forever. You need to consume intentionally. High performers are selective. Average people are indiscriminate. Here's another rule. Creation before consumption. Before you scroll, you work. Before you watch, you produce. Before you absorb, you execute. This flips the power dynamic. You stop being a passive receiver and become an active operator. That shift alone changes identity. Let's talk about information overload. More information does not equal more clarity. Often it creates paralysis. People consume endlessly to avoid responsibility. They say they're learning when they're actually delaying action. Knowledge without execution creates arrogance, not power. That's the key. You don't need more ideas. You need fewer distractions. You don't need more inspiration. You need more control. Control over what enters your mind. Control over what stays there. Control over what you reinforce. This is mental hygiene. And just like physical hygiene, neglect creates disease. Here's your assignment. For the next 14 days, remove one major distraction. Reduce input during your most focused hours. Add at least 30 minutes of silence daily. No music, no phone, no stimulation, just you and your thoughts. It will feel uncomfortable. That's the point. Discomfort is the signal that you're reclaiming control. One last truth. A powerful inner world does not happen by accident. It is designed, protected, maintained. Most people want strength without changing their environment. That's impossible. You don't rise above your environment. You sink to its level. Unless you take control, you've now removed noise. You've limited distractions. You've protected attention. Now comes the final internal shift. Because even with discipline, detachment, and focus, most people still break under pressure. Why? Because they don't know who they are. You've cleaned the environment. Now you must solidify identity. Chapter 9. Identity is the final lever of control. Everything you've learned so far leads to this chapter. Because no matter how strong your habits are, no matter how disciplined your system is, no matter how clean your environment is, you will always fall back to who you believe you are. That's the key. Most people think identity is something they discover. It's not. Identity is something you practice. Every action you repeat casts a vote for the type of person you become. You don't rise to goals. You fall to identity. That rule explains almost every failure pattern. People set goals they're not aligned with, so when pressure hits, identity wins. You have a choice. You can let old labels run your life, or you can build an identity strong enough to carry your ambitions. Let's be clear, identity is not personality. It's not how you feel. It's not what you say. Identity is how you behave when no one is watching, when it's boring, when it's uncomfortable, when there's no reward. That's who you really are. Everything else is performance. That's the key. Most people are trapped by outdated identities. I'm not disciplined. I'm not confident. I've always been like this. Those are not facts. They're stories reinforced by repetition. Stories you've told yourself so often that they feel permanent. But permanence is an illusion. Identity is plastic. It hardens only when you stop challenging it. Here's how identity actually forms. Action, evidence, belief, identity. Not the other way around. People wait to feel disciplined before acting disciplined. That never works. You act first. Evidence accumulates. Belief adjusts. Identity locks in. That's the sequence. Skip action, and identity never changes. Let's talk about self-image sabotage. When people start improving, identity resistance kicks in. They say, this isn't me. I'm not that kind of person. I'll probably fail. That resistance is the old identity defending itself. Because identity wants consistency, not growth. Growth threatens familiarity. So your mind tries to pull you back. That's normal. What's dangerous is obeying it. That's the key. Strong identities are built on rules, not emotions. I do what I said I would do. I don't miss twice. I handle discomfort without drama. These are identity rules. They remove debate. They remove negotiation. When identity is rule-based, behavior becomes automatic. That's power. Let's be specific. Pick an identity worth earning. Not something flashy, something functional. I am consistent. I am calm under pressure. I finish what I start. Then ask one question daily. What would someone like this do today? Then do that. No motivation, no emotion, just alignment. Most people try to change identity with affirmations. That's fantasy. Affirmations without evidence create internal conflict. Your mind doesn't believe words. It believes patterns. So stop talking. Start proving. Proof builds identity faster than intention ever will. Here's a dangerous mistake. People try to stack identities too fast. I'm disciplined, confident, productive, successful. No. Build one at a time. One identity, reinforced daily, until it becomes automatic. Depth beats breadth. That's the key. Let's talk about pressure again. Under pressure, Identity decides behavior, not goals, not plans, not logic. If your identity is weak, pressure exposes it. If your identity is solid, pressure sharpens it. That's why this chapter matters. Here's the rule you adopt. Never act in a way that contradicts the identity you're building. Not perfectly, consistently. Occasional mistakes don't matter. Patterns do. Identity is not fragile, unless you keep betraying it. Here's your assignment. Choose one identity rule. Just one. Example, I do the hard thing first. I show up even when I don't feel like it. I don't avoid discomfort. Then prove it daily for 30 days. No announcements. No validation. No shortcuts. Let the evidence speak. One more truth. Once identity shifts, everything else becomes easier. Discipline feels natural. Focus feels normal. Detachment feels obvious because you're no longer forcing behavior. You're expressing who you are. That's the final lever. You've controlled your reactions. You've questioned your thoughts. You've built discipline. You've detached from outcomes. You've removed validation. You've designed your environment. You've anchored identity. There's only one thing left. Understanding why this gives you an advantage most people never develop. You've built the system. Now you see the edge. Chapter 10. Inner control is the ultimate competitive advantage. Everything you've learned so far was not about self-improvement. It was about positioning. Because in the real world, the biggest advantage is not talent. It's not intelligence. It's not luck. It's inner control. That's the key. Let's be brutally honest. Skills can be copied. Information is everywhere. Resources are accessible. What's rare is someone who stays calm under pressure, consistent without praise, focused without supervision. That person wins, not once, repeatedly. Because while others react, they execute. Most people lose not because they're outmatched, but because they're internally unstable. They panic when things slow down. They overreact to feedback. They abandon strategy when emotions spike. Inner chaos leaks into decisions, and decisions compound. That's why average people stay average, even with good opportunities. They can't hold their position internally. Let's talk competition. In any competitive environment, pressure increases. Deadlines, uncertainty, risk. Under pressure, reactive minds collapse. Disciplined minds sharpen. You've trained the second type. That's your edge. You don't flinch when emotions rise. You don't spiral when outcomes delay. You don't seek approval when decisions matter. You move forward quietly. That's dominance. Inner control gives you something priceless. Time advantage. While others waste energy reacting, you conserve it. While others debate emotionally, you decide logically. While others burn out, you stay steady. Over time, that gap becomes impossible to close. That's the key. Let's kill another illusion. People think confidence comes from winning. Wrong. Confidence comes from self-trust. And self-trust comes from keeping promises to yourself, acting consistently, remaining composed under stress. You don't need external proof when you've proven yourself internally. That's unshakable confidence. Here's something most people never realize. Inner control makes you unpredictable. Reactive people are easy to read. They show emotion instantly. They telegraph insecurity. Controlled people reveal nothing. They don't rush. They don't explain. They don't perform. That unpredictability commands respect, because no one can push your buttons if you don't give them access. Let's connect this back to success. Success is not a breakthrough moment. It's a pressure test. And pressure doesn't create character. It exposes it. You've built a character that holds. That's why this work matters. Not when things are easy, but when they're hard. Here's the final truth. Inner control is invisible. No one applauds it. No one celebrates it. But it decides everything. It decides who stays consistent, who adapts intelligently, who outlasts others. Quiet people with inner order eventually dominate loud people with inner chaos. Every time, you have a choice. You can stop here and treat this audiobook as information, or you can live it, because knowledge without execution is entertainment. Execution without control is chaos, but execution with inner control is unstoppable. Let's lock this in. You don't chase success anymore. You attract it through consistency. You don't rely on motivation. You rely on structure. You don't react to the world. You respond deliberately. You don't need permission. You don't need validation. You don't need applause. You already have what most people don't. Control. This is your final challenge. For the next 90 days, control your reactions. Question your thoughts. Act without negotiating with weakness. Measure execution, not emotion. Protect your inner environment. Reinforce your identity daily. Do this quietly. No announcements. No shortcuts. Let results arrive on their own timeline. Because when your inner world is ordered, the outer world eventually aligns. That's not motivation. That's reality. You control yourself or something else will. Choose wisely. Let's be clear. Nothing outside you needs to change first. Not your job. Not your income. Not your circumstances. The moment you gain control over your thoughts, your emotions, and your reactions, your decisions sharpen, your actions stabilize, and results follow naturally. Stop chasing success like it's hiding from you. Success responds to self-command. From today, observe your thoughts. Pause before reacting. Act without negotiating with weakness. This audiobook is useless if you just listen. It only works if you apply it daily. Your challenge is simple. For the next 30 days, control your inner world first and watch how the outer world starts adjusting to you. No motivation, no excuses, just control.